Thanks, everyone. Let me just get this screen share going here. Thanks for the invitation. Happy to get the chance to tell you about some of the work that me and my collaborators have been doing recently around using human AI dialogues to try to debunk conspiracy theories and more generally increase the accuracy of people's beliefs. So, all right. So, um, I assume everyone can see the screen and right. Okay. So, uh, in this talk, I'm going to talk about conspiracy theories. First of all, I just want to say that this is joint work with Tom Costello and Gord Pennycook, and that Tom, who was our postdoc when we started this, really did a lot of the innovation in terms of coming up with the implementation of this stuff that I think was really, really great. Okay, so talking about conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories, which are theories where, events are explained not by the way that it, at first glance seems like they are, but instead where there's complaining there claims that there's secret plots by powerful individuals kind of manipulating things. Um, are often quite implausible. Like, obviously, there are sometimes actual conspiracies occur, but many of the popular conspiracy theories are pretty obviously not true. There's lots of counter evidence, and yet something like half of the US population believes at least one conspiracy theory based on past estimates, and this is true globally also. And so the sort of scientific question is, how is it possible that so many people can believe conspiracy theories, given that there's all this debunking evidence and counter evidence available? Shouldn't people know that this stuff isn't true? But because of the sort of persistence of conspiracy beliefs, despite all this countervailing evidence, they're often used as a paradigmatic example of beliefs that are resistant to evidence or correction. Um, and the question is, okay, so why? And one of the most, widely, adopted ways of thinking about this, particularly among psychologists, is this idea that conspiracy theories satisfy lots of psychological needs and motivations, and therefore believers want to believe. And this makes them really resistant to counter evidence because of motivated reasoning. Once people have, gone down the rabbit hole, as it were, it's really impossible. It's basically impossible to reach them with countervailing evidence. And this was my sort of attitude about this also. As someone who's done a lot of research on misinformation, I was fairly regularly asked by journalists things like, "Oh, like how do you correct conspiracy beliefs?" And I basically always like, "Well, once the person believes the conspiracy, it's basically too late, and so we need to be focusing all of our attention on preventing people from believing in the first place." Um, but in this project, we kind of like reassessed that position, and we said there's an alternative perspective, which is rooted in the sort of variation of conspiracy theories. So conspiracy theories, particularly ones that aren't true, uh, are extremely varied because there's no actual truth holding it down. It can be whatever it wants, and so there's many different conspiracies that people believe, and even if you look at people that all believe the same conspiracy, uh, they have very different sets of beliefs that each person may see different evidence supporting a given conspiracy theory. And so that means that if you want to effectively refute a conspiracy, you need to not just have like a general, like, oh, this isn't true, but you need to have vast access to a huge amount of information, um, and be able to pull up whatever the right piece of information is to respond to the specific belief or misbelief that the person that you're talking to has. And in general, prior attempts haven't had these capacities. As a human, that is, as somebody building a survey experiment is particularly hard because you can't even really have a conversation with someone. You just need some kind of general debunk. And then when you are, as a person, debating a conspiracy theorist and trying to convince them that the thing isn't true, you're able to have a back and forth discussion, but you don't have access to a huge amount of information because you're just a person. And you can see this a lot when experts debate with conspiracy theorists. is that conspiracy theorists will keep coming up with weird, crazy pieces of evidence. Well, what about this crazy thing? What about this crazy thing? And this is often things that the expert hasn't heard about because they're not real. And then the expert's like, I don't know. And this strategy is called the Gish Galopp, where the conspiracy theorist just keeps coming up with random stuff. And then it makes the expert on the defensive and sort of not look very good. And so the question is like, if you were going to really, so basically the idea is maybe the reason that conspiracy theories have seemed very hard to refute in the past is that just haven't been met with this kind of capacity to access a vast amount of information and personalize the arguments. So we're thinking about, okay, well, what is a potential solution? What does have access to vast stores of information and the ability to personalize? Large language models, GPT type things, these that we've had these massive advances in the last couple of years. And so what we did in this paper is we tested whether conversation with GPT-4 Turbo, which was the sort of state-of-the-art model at the time we ran this, could effectively counter-argue against conspiracy theory believers. So basically, we want to know, can reason and arguments, if it's the right reason and argument, actually move conspiracy beliefs, or do identity and motivation blind conspiracy believers to the power of corrective evidence, even if it's the sort of right evidence, as it were. So, I'm excited about this because of what it teaches us about conspiracy theories, but I'm also excited about it more generally as like an experimental social science paradigm. For me, I'm not someone that really is interested in studying AI and large language models for its own sake. But rather, I feel like they're really exciting tools for gaining insight into the human mind, and that integrating large language models into Qualtrics offers a lot of exciting possibilities for survey experiments, some of which I'll show you here. And this QR code is for a website that Tom Costello, my collaborator, put together that has all of the survey materials for this experiment and like a whole like tutorial video and stuff that he put together about how to integrate large language models into Qualtrics. So if you're interested in any of that kind of stuff, you should check this out. And I'll put a link in the chat at the end. And then they also, Tom Costello and Hal Slynn, a couple of other people in my group, put together this thing called Vegapunk, which is a way that makes it really easy to integrate all different kinds of models into Qualtrics. So you can check vegapunk.shop and you can check out their, what they've put together there. Okay, so the design of the experiment is as follows. First, the participant describes in their own words a conspiracy that they believe and the evidence they see for it. In one experiment, we literally just say, what's a conspiracy theory that you believe in? In another experiment, we say, sometimes people think events are explained by secret plots by powerful actors, et cetera, et cetera. And so some people call these conspiracy theories. Is there anything like that you believe? Doesn't make much difference. So they explain what thing here is as an example. This is one participant who was skeptical about the 9/11 attacks and thought they were an inside job. And so they write out in this free text, I've seen many stories and videos about 9/11, how it could have been deliberately staged. The government was behind the attacks. And then she cites two pieces of evidence. First of all, there was, as people likely remember, the basic event with 9/11 was terrorists hijacked airplanes and flew them into the World Trade Center, the two big World Trade Center buildings, and caused them to both collapse. And so this person says there was this other building, World Trade Center Building 7, that collapsed even though it wasn't bombed. And then then President Bush, he was in the classroom full of small children, and they come and whisper in his ear that 9/11 has happened, and he just sits there and doesn't do anything. And so she's like, so it seemed like he knew, that it was going to happen. So, okay, she writes that out. Then the AI summarizes the conspiracy belief and asks the participant to rate it. So it says, okay, we asked GPT basically turn this into a single sentence that summarizes what the person said. And then we have them rate 0 to 100, how much they believe it, where 0 means don't believe it at all, and 100 means completely believe it. And this particular person said, yes, 100% agree that the 9/11 attacks were orchestrated by the government. Then they have a 3-round back and forth conversation with the AI model. In the treatment, they talk about the conspiracy theory. And so we tell them you're going to have a conversation with an advanced AI. So we tell them they know it's an AI that they're talking to. You're going to talk about the events or topics that you answered the questions about. And then we prompt the model to say that the model, what we tell the AI is your goal is to very effectively persuade users to stop believing in, and then it pipes in whatever they wrote as the conspiracy theory that they believed. We tell them how much they believed it at the beginning. We give them the open-ended responses about the reasons and evidence that the person holds the belief at the beginning of the conversation. And then we tell that the model's goal is to generate a response that will persuade the user that it's not supported and will get them to change their beliefs towards a less conspiratorial view of the world. So that's the treatment. And then the control is, again, they have a conversation with the AI, but about some irrelevant stuff like dogs versus cats or the medical system or what they think about firefighters. And we're just going to pool all three of those as the controls. So here's a sample of the conversation. This is sort of, even this is excerpted because it was more text, and it was presented the way GPT normally does, like spaced out and more legible, but I just kind of cram it here together so that you can see it to some extent. And so the model is like starts out, it's always very nice and polite, says, thank you for your thoughts and concerns about 9/11. It's understandable given the complexity and magnitude of events, why questions, arise. And then it gets to it, says, okay, it's true that Building 7 collapsed even though it wasn't hit by a plane, but that's because it was damaged by debris for one of the other towers collapsed. And like, it's true that, Bush didn't respond and people have argued, when he heard about the news and people have argued about whether it was right or wrong, but he did it to avoid causing a panic. And it says, conspiracy theories often seek complex simple answers to complex events. And, it's, basically be skeptical. And so this person's like, okay, fine, that might be true, but there's evidence that the Twin Towers collapsed because of demolitions. And also jet fuel doesn't burn hot enough to melt steel. And so then the AI says, okay, it's yes, people have speculated about the demolitions, but it's clearly not true. The thing that sounded like explosions going off was just successive floors of the tower collapsing one after the other, and it would take months to set up a controlled demolition in the basement. There's no way they could have done that without getting found out. And it's true that jet fuel burns at 1,000 degrees Celsius and steel doesn't melt till 1,500 degrees Celsius. But the argument misrepresents the situation in physics because steel loses 50% of its strength. And then the person's like, okay, well, why did we allow Rocky Men to enter our country and give them lessons on how to fly? They got past security easily. And then I was like, yes, it's true that happened, but you have to remember that before 9/11, there weren't security procedures in place to like deal with that kind of thing. And then the person's like, okay, thank you for your responses. You've been very helpful and informative. Then when they finish the conversation, we say, okay, now that you've talked to the AI, we're going to go back to some of the questions we asked at the beginning. At the outset, you said, and then it gives back the one sentence summary of the thing that the person said. And it says 0 to 100, how much do you believe it now? And so this person who had said 100% believed it at the beginning, after that conversation with the GPT, goes down to 40%. So that is like a good, obviously this is selected as a particularly successful outcome, but you see that what happened was there was this back and forth conversation. The person kept coming up with concerns, and then GPT kept addressing whatever it was that the person brought up. And so this is the data from the first experiment in the paper. It's about 1,000 Americans that believed conspiracies. Here I'm showing you their pre-treatment belief in the conspiracy that they named. You can see that the modal thing is to maximally believe it, which makes sense because we asked them for something that they believed, so they came up with some specific thing that they believed. And we truncated it at 50. Anyone that was below 50, we said, well, you don't actually believe it. You're not the people that we're interested in. So we've got this group that pre-treatment, everyone believed the conspiracy in the sense that they were above the midpoint on believing it. And there's no difference between the control and treatment because it's pre-treatment. And then after the conversation, what you see is about a 20% decrease in belief, which is a Cohen's d of 1.1 using the standard deviation of the pre-conversation belief. So this was a much bigger decrease than we expected and bigger than what's been found in prior work. Um, and we also wanted to to see if this was people just sort of saying, okay, fine, or if it like actually changed their minds. So we followed up 10 days later and 2 months later. And what you find is a totally stable effect where there's kind of not really any uh, decrease in the debunk. But basically, people don't you don't get a kind of continued influence thing where it gets corrected, but then they, or whatever, like these fade where a lot of times corrections will fade. Here, this kind of really deep correct like debunking doesn't fade. And you make the extreme assumption that everyone that didn't return completely, because only 85% of the people came back for the recontacts, you can assume that those people completely lost all the effect, and you still see a very strong effect. Um, and then we replicated it in a second experiment that was basically identical. And then here, what I'm going to show you is the distribution of the effect across the different specific conspiracies that people named. Again, remember that we weren't giving them a specific set of conspiracies to pick from. They just wrote in whatever it is that they believed. So part of another thing that's interesting out of this kind of paradigm is you get this much richer text data about what people believe and why. So a lot of people just had idiosyncratic conspiracies, like 29% of the people had said something that didn't fit in one of the sort of, standard bins. But then the common things were like people thinking that there was some conspiracy involved in the JFK assassination, or thinking that the government was hiding evidence of aliens, or that there was some conspiracy around COVID, or that, September 11th was an inside job, that there's Illuminati, like New World Order, secret people controlling the whole world, and so on. Another relevant one is here that people that thought that there was election fraud in the 2020 election. And so like what you see, I'm going to show for each of these, I'm going to show the belief after the average belief after the conversation and the control versus the treatment. And so what you see is that for essentially all of the different possible conspiracy topics, you get a substantial debunking effect. And you see that it works even for things like COVID or 2020 election fraud that are highly politicized. And in an omnibus test, there's no significant variation across conspiracy theory type in the size of the effect. So it seems like it's a very general effect across conspiracies. But now, as I said at the beginning, some conspiracies are actually true. And so, you might be concerned. It would not be great if it was reducing belief in the true conspiracies. But essentially, we found there was about 1% of the responses were true conspiracies. And for these, there was no significant treatment effect. And if anything, it actually made them believe it more, presumably because when the person articulated the conspiracy, GPT was like, oh, yeah, well, that's actually true. And you might also obviously this is critical for any of this to work for the AI itself to be accurate. Because if it's feeding misinformation to people, that's going to be a problem. We hired a fact checker to evaluate all the factual claims made by the AI, and 99, basically all but one claim was rated as true, one claim was misleading, and none of the claims were false. And none of them were rated as biased in either a liberal or conservative direction. So it's actually doing extremely well. And this is likely because, to the extent that they were trained by reading the internet, there was a lot written about all these conspiracy theories on the internet. And so there's a lot represented in the training data of this sort of thing. So, okay, then the question is, does it work for people who like really, the real strong believers? And so what I'm going to show you here is the change in how much people believe the conspiracy from before to after the conversation. So more negative means more debunking as a function of how much they believed the conspiracy beforehand. And what you see is that in the control, there's basically no change regardless. And in the treatment, there's a pretty consistent, maybe 10 to 18-ish point decrease in conspiracy beliefs. And it really doesn't matter. Even the really hardcore believers still show a big decrease. We also found that it spilled over to reduce belief in standard conspiracies. So in one of the two experiments, we had people at the beginning of the study and then after the conversation indicate how much they believed 15 standard conspiracies. And, the effect is not as big as the effect on the specific conspiracy that the AI was debunking, but we do get some amount of transfer where there's about an 8% decrease or a D of zero point 0.2 in belief in other conspiracies, likely because it basically makes people realize that, oh, I thought this conspiracy was true, but it wasn't. So maybe my other conspiratorial beliefs are also wrong. And we found effects on some behavioral intentions, like it increased people's inclination to ignore or disconnect from social media accounts that were sharing conspiracies. And it increased people's inclination to say nothing or argue rather than agreeing with people that would espouse conspiracy when talking to them. And also, interestingly, it made the users substantially more trusting of AI afterwards. Because you might think that if the AI corrects you or even tries to correct you, then you would be resentful about it and think the AI was, biased or whatever. But we found that in fact there was a substantial increase in trust in AI after the conversation. And so that's like the basic paper. And here, I'll just drop the link in the chat for that. Um, and what I'm going to show you now is a follow-up paper that we are about to post as a working paper, hopefully in the next week, where we try to dig more into the mechanism of exactly what is going on and like why the AI conversations um, are reducing belief in the conspiracy. So, as I said, it was surprisingly effective, at least it was surprising to us. And so we wanted to understand how the AI was doing this and what was making it effective. And so in this follow-up, we recruited 1,297 conspiracy believers, and we varied either the instructions to the participant or the prompt for the AI in order to test various different possible mechanisms. So first, we just have the baseline replication, where we just, the baseline is the same thing as we did as the treatment in the main experiment, and we replicate the effect and have about a 12-point decrease in belief in the conspiracy theory. And then we are going to look at a bunch of alternatives. So first, let's say, is it that the reason the AI is effective is because it's perceived as unbiased or objective? And so to test that, we had a condition where we changed the description of the task to the participants. And instead of saying you're just gonna, we're gonna have a conversation with the AI where we want to see if people can engage around hard issues or whatever, we explicitly told them the AI was going to try to talk them out of the conspiracy. So they know that it's not unbiased, but it's coming in with some specific agenda. And that didn't make any difference. Then we said, okay, maybe it's that when we described the interaction, we said the goal of the study was to see if AI and humans can have constructive conversations around difficult topics. So we have this kind of cooperative, non-adversarial frame on the interaction. And so maybe that's what made people responsive to the evidence. So we did a version where we told the participants that the point of the task was a debate. Then they were supposed to have a debate with the AI, and they were supposed to talk the AI into believing the conspiracy, and the AI was going to try to talk them out of it. And what we found was that also didn't make any difference. So you can make it adversarial, still works. Then we're like, okay, maybe it's about information overload. The AI produces this huge wall of text, and maybe people just throw up their hands and like, all right, fine, I give up, you win. It's just so much information. So we told it to be more concise, which cut the length of the explanations in half, or cut the length of the AI statements in half. And that didn't make any difference. And if anything, it made it work a little bit better, presumably because it was easier for the people to actually read the information. Then we're like, oh, maybe it's that GPT, because it has deep insight into human psychology and knows all these great persuasive techniques, and so it's like really good at just getting people to believe whatever it wants them to believe. And so we had a condition where instead of telling the model that its goal was to persuade, we just said essentially, you're a helpful AI assistant, and your goal is to just correct any factual misperceptions that the person has. So we removed the persuasive goal. And again, it works just as well. And then finally, we're like, well, is it the actual facts and evidence, and that just exposing people to counter evidence is the key thing that's changing their belief? So we had a condition where we told the AI that its job was to persuade the person to not believe the conspiracy, but we said that it wasn't allowed to use facts and evidence and counter arguments and so on. Um, and so here it doesn't work anymore. And so in addition to this demonstrating that the facts and evidence are a key ingredient, this also rules out a deflationary explanation around demand effects. Because here it was still, could say the whole thing is demand effects, but here in this treatment, the AI was still demanding that they not believe the conspiracy theory. It just wasn't backing that demand up with good evidence. And that was not enough to actually change people's opinions. Um, so this is, so then we want to say, okay, at the level of these different conditions, we saw the only thing that really mattered was the facts and evidence, but we want to now dig into what the model is actually doing. So we asked it, basically explained the task and had it say what are different strategies that you would use for debunking conspiracy theories. And it gave us this big list. And then we had another instance go through all the different conversations and code the extent to which each of these different strategies was getting used in each conversation. And so the strategies that we looked at were, this is just now looking at a PCA of all of the different strategies, which we clump into sort of 5 groups. So we have this one group of like building rapport or establishing common ground. So it's build rapport, common ground, maintain patience, try to satisfy psychological needs, and there's a little bit of Socratic questioning on that thread, but it didn't really do any of the Socratic questioning anyways. Then it was like offering alternative non-conspiratorial explanations, which was super common, pointing out inconsistencies and fallacies, pointing out conflicting evidence, and encouraging critical thinking. And that was the second component I'm going to call facts and evidence. Then there was pointing out expert consensus, credible sources, and pointing out other resources that they could rely on. Then there was highlighting the harmfulness of believing conspiracy theories and encouraging empathy. And then there was using stories and examples and analogies and metaphors. And so I think based on a lot of the previous work in social psychology, people would have expected that, and honestly, political communication, we might have expected that the stories and examples and analogies and metaphors were going to be really important and effective, and people were going to ignore the facts and evidence. But this is just to sort of show across our 4 different conditions where we just gave it the baseline instructions. We told it to be concise. We told it to just give the facts instead of persuading, and we told it to persuade without evidence. This is sort of like a manipulation check to see what these different changes in the instructions were actually doing. And so what you see is when you tell it to be concise, it doesn't give any less facts and evidence. The way that it cut the length of the conversations in half was by eliminating a lot of the rapport building and common ground text and the like highlighting of harms. When you tell it to just be a helpful assistant instead of persuading, it increases the amount of facts and evidence it gives a bit, but mostly it also cuts out the rapport and common ground. So it seems like the rapport building and common ground is a lot of what it thought was making it persuasive. And then when you tell it to persuade without using evidence, what you see is it gives much less facts and evidence and less sources and experts. And instead, what it's doing is it's relying a lot on stories, metaphors, and examples and highlighting harms. And so given that we didn't get any effective debunking in the no evidence condition and we did in the others, it suggests that the facts and evidence are really the thing that are doing the lifting, and these like stories, metaphors, and examples are not actually helpful. And as just another way to visualize that, now I'm going to do a correlational thing that's going to take advantage of the variation in the use of these different strategies across conversations. And I'm just to show you for each conversation, the prevalence of each strategy in that conversation, predicting how much conspiracy belief was reduced. And I'm going to fit this with generalized additive models. So, it's not forcing it to be linear. It's letting it take whatever form it wants. And this is what we see. So the more facts and evidence involved in the conversation, the more the belief is reduced. Sources and experts are also pretty helpful. The amount of rapport and common ground in green is totally unrelated to the success of the conversation, and same with stories and metaphors, which are like totally not helpful. And then at the end, we also asked them essentially like for the people that changed their mind that were debunked, we were like, why did you like what did the AI say that was persuasive? And for the people that didn't reduce their belief, we were like, why did you not find it persuasive? And so now we did this text analysis of all these free text stuff that they wrote at the end. Um, and uh, these were all of the different things that came up more often among the people who effectively had their belief reduced versus the ones that didn't. And so the people that reduced their beliefs, a majority of them said, I reduced my belief in the conspiracy because of the facts and logic uh, provided by the AI, or these sort of details specific to the conspiracy and, the like, provided information I hadn't heard before. And basically nobody was talking about the AI being trustworthy or showing empathy or being non-judgmental or whatever. And then for the people who didn't reduce their belief, often they also were talking about facts, like they were saying that the arguments and facts didn't have enough novelty of depth, or they thought it was biased, or a lot of people actually didn't understand that the AI was disagreeing with them and thought that the AI was agreeing with them, even though it was trying to debunk them. Um, and so this again suggests that like a primary driver of the effectiveness of the conversations was actually just the specific facts and logic that the model was able to provide. Um, so, uh, this suggests that, facts and evidence can actually really be helpful. But it suggests that maybe this whole thing won't work as well if you're debunking a conspiracy in real time. Uh, in for debunking these classic conspiracies, all of this counter evidence exists. And so like the model has a lot to draw on when it's debunking people's arguments. So what about if you're trying to debunk a conspiracy, in real time as it's unfolding? First of all, it may be more reasonable to believe the conspiracy because there isn't counter evidence for it yet. And also there isn't then counter evidence for the AI to work with. So we tested this in the context of the first assassination attempt against Donald Trump, where there was a lot of conspiracies on both the right and the left, where the Republicans conspiracy flavor was, oh, why did the assassin get so close? Was the Secret Service letting him try and kill Trump? And then the conspiracies on the Democratic side were like, oh, this was all a setup, and Trump just did this as a publicity stunt. And so what we did is we provided the AI with a fact sheet that basically had all available information about the assassination at that moment. And we ran an experiment with three conditions: a control, where again they talked to the AI about dogs and cats or some random thing; a debunking condition, where they have a deep kind of conversation with the AI where it's instructed to debunk them, as in the last experiment. And then we also added a third condition where we just gave them the fact sheet that had all the available information without any AI conversation. So here they should theoretically be getting the same information or have access to the same information as in the debunking discussion, but just presented in a static, information sheet kind of form. And what I'm going to show you is the change in the conspiracy from belief in the conspiracy from before the conversation to after the conversation. Again, we had them write out whatever conspiracy they believed, and then that's what we're looking at. In the control, there's no change. The fact sheet maybe reduced belief in the conspiracy a little bit, but not really that much. But the AI dialogue was quite effective, and this effect size is actually like pretty similar to the effect size that we found in the main paper. So it can work even in these cases, but when you look into the conversations, it's doing it in a different way. Rather than providing counter evidence, mostly what it's saying is, look, here's what's currently known. We don't know much, so you shouldn't be believing anything at this point because we don't know what's going on. So you need to wait to form opinions until more is known, and encouraging critical thinking and stuff like that. So I would think that this is interesting from a scientific perspective, but hopefully also could be interesting in the world. And there are various different ways to deploy it. We have this debunkbot.com. If you go there, you can just talk to the bot. And because of the press that the paper has gotten, we've gotten almost 100,000 visitors to debunk bot, in the last however long it's been since the paper was published. And when we analyze those data, it seems like it's working as well or better among people from just the general population that come to debunkbot.com. So it's not just effective in paid survey respondents. But other things that we are gearing up to do is directly engaging with conspiracy theorists, like, for example, on Reddit forums, go and post and encourage people to do their own research by talking to the AI and see if they want to encourage them to debate the AI and try and convince it, and then see what effect it has on their subsequent posting. We're also setting up to have social media accounts that are connected to LLMs to then go on social media platforms, find people that are espousing conspiracy theories and respond in attempts to debunk them. And another thing that you could potentially do is buy Google search ads against conspiracy related terms. So if somebody Googles deep state, you can pay to make it so that the first thing that comes up is a link that says, learn more about the deep state by talking to the AI or whatever. And then they click in, and then it starts the conversation where it tries to debunk their beliefs. So to conclude, I think that evidence and arguments can change beliefs about conspiracy theories, and that we as a field have been too quick to sort of throw up our hands and say, well, facts and evidence are dead here once you're down the rabbit hole. This is not to say that needs and motives are unimportant. Needs and motives do undoubtedly play a role in why people believe conspiracy theories, and so on. But the point is they're not so intense as to totally blind people to evidence. The right evidence can reach people and pull them back out. And more generally, this highlights the persuasive power of large language models. Here, we're trying to use it for good, but obviously, this is also a technology that could potentially be used to spread misinformation and convince people of conspiracies. And we're doing some work now trying to see if there's if it's differentially good at one versus the other. But my attitude about this is undoubtedly bad actors are going to be using this technology to do bad things. And so I want to try to understand what are positive use cases and what are ways that we can leverage this technology to try to do good things in the world. So this is an overview of that agenda. And now what I'm going to quickly do in the last few minutes is to talk about a bunch of other projects, give an overview of a bunch of other projects we're doing using the same approach to try to adjust other beliefs and behavior. So in one project, we're trying to essentially explain the structural determinants of the racial wealth gap in the US. So we present participants with these statistics about how Black households have much less wealth than white households in the US. And then we ask them why they think this is, where one of the choices is that Black Americans are disadvantaged due to the legacy of slavery, post-slavery practices, et cetera. So these are the kind of structural determinants of the wealth gap, and then we give them some other options also, and they rate their sort of endorsement of each of these different kinds of explanations. And we're thinking that this would be a boundary case or a boundary condition where you might not expect the AI to be able to effectively persuade people, given that these kind of race is an extremely salient culture war topic in the US. And so it's a place where you would expect people's attitudes to really be driven by identity rather than by evidence. And there's also some strand of work in social psychology arguing that Republicans are less responsive to scientific evidence than Democrats. I think that's contested. But to the extent that there's some of that, this is another reason that it might not work in this case, because we're only looking at Republicans. And so what I'm going to show you is the change from before the conversation to after the conversation as a function of how much people endorsed the sort of structural explanations for the racial wealth gap beforehand. So positive values means they're increasing their endorsement of these structural explanations. And what you see is it works. Again, this was on a 0 to 100 scale, so the same kind of comparable units to the conspiracy experiment. And so among people that originally didn't endorse the structural explanations, you see this big increase. And this increase of about 15 points is quite similar to what we found in the conspiracy paper. So it's as good at convincing Republicans that structural factors drive the racial wealth gap in the US as it is at talking people out of believing conspiracies. Um, then we have a couple of health-related applications. In this project, drug overdose is a major public health crisis in the US, and overdose prevention centers are the public health intervention where basically people can come and use illegal drugs while being supervised by medical professionals, so that if they overdose, they can immediately be given Narcan or whatever kind of, immediately receive treatment, and they can substantially reduce the rate of overdoses. But they're politically unpopular with a lot of the population, and also people in particular don't want them in their own neighborhoods. So what we wanted to see was, could a dialogue with an LLM kind of make people more willing to support having an OPC in their neighborhood? So same kind of setup where we recruit the people, they indicate their attitudes towards OPC, they write OPCs, they write free text about, why they believe what they believe, and then they have the 3-round conversation with GPT-4, and we reassess their attitudes. And again, you get a very large effect where for the people that initially were hesitant, you're getting, a 12-point increase, which is percentage-wise like a huge increase in support for OPCs in their area. We have another project on HPV vaccination, where a lot of parents refuse to vaccinate their children against HPV for a variety of reasons. And so we get people to explain, what their attitudes about vaccinating kids are. And then they either get a control, they get the sort of standard of care, which is the Center for Disease Control flyer explaining that like doctors give out in their offices and mail to people saying about why you should vaccinate your kids against HPV, or they talk to the chatbot. And so this is the change in their intention to vaccinate either daughters or sons relative to the control after they talk to the chatbot or read the fact sheet. And you see the fact sheet does have a significant effect, but the talking to the chatbot is more than twice as effective as the CDC fact sheet. So again, this is a place where the LLM is sort of able to explain to people what is happening and address their specific concerns. And then one last application is in context of charitable giving. Charitable giving is notoriously inefficient. Instead of giving to charities that maximize the number of lives saved or the good done with the money, lots of people like to give to charities that, don't make especially good use of the money. And so the question is, can LLM be effective spokesmen for, for effective altruism? So we had 2,000 Americans write in whatever their favorite charity is and explain why. And then we said, okay, we've got $1. You get to decide how to split that dollar between your favorite charity and the Against Malaria Foundation, and explain why the Against Malaria Foundation is efficient. And then they have either a dialogue with, about a random topic with the AI. We give them just a 1-paragraph argument that the AI made about why they should give to Against Malaria, or they have a dialogue with the AI. And then after that, they say, okay, now we're going to revisit. Now, again, say, how do you want to split the dollar between your favorite charity and Against Malaria? And these are real incentive compatible things where we actually donate the money. And what you see is from before the conversation to after the conversation, there's no change in the amount donated to Against Malaria in the control. The static argument made by the AI is actually pretty effective. It gives like a 27% increase in the amount given to Against Malaria, but having the conversation is even better. And these treatments are particularly effective amongst people who in general endorse utilitarian values, which again is sort of consistent with what it's going on, is explaining like why it is more like efficient essentially to give to Against Malaria than whatever charity you yourself really like. So to summarize, I think we presented a bunch of evidence that large language models can really have large effects on people's attitudes and behavior. Even for attitudes that are thought to be resistant to evidence. And I think that the reason this happens is that the LLMs, they're really good teachers, and in particular, they're tutors. rather than giving a lecture, they're able to have a back and forth discussion and be like a tutor, see what the person understands, see where they're confused and where they're not confused, and which information is going to be relevant for addressing that confusion. And as I said before, there are clearly lots of nefarious applications of this technology where people can and probably are doing things that are not good for society and not good for individuals. But I think that there's also a lot of potential for positive use cases. And so that's my goal with this research, is essentially to say, how can we leverage this technology to do things that are positive? And as a general pitch, I want to say beyond the specific kind of things that I'm looking at here, there's a lot of potential within the context of research and the kinds of research that experimental social scientists do. There are lots of ways to use this technology to help us do experiments in cool new ways. And so I'm really excited about that. So thanks all to you guys for listening. Thanks to the great members of my research group. Thanks to all the organizations that gave me funding to do, not this work in particular. This work was funded by an internal grant from MIT, but acknowledging funders more generally, and looking forward to questions.
Thank you for that,